Today's story is one of resilience in the face of loss. A mother's love would be tested in a situation that would make anyone break in the face of their limitations. Let's go. It was December 15, 1997, in North Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. 26-year-old Luzaida Cuevas was recovering from her hospital visit in her two-story home. 10 days earlier, Luzaida had just given birth to a baby girl she named Delimar, her third child and only daughter. Later in the day, after dinner, Delimar had drifted into a slumber. Luzaida decided to put her down for the night. She took Delimar upstairs and set her in the crib sitting in the front room. After Delimar was laid in her crib, Luzaida went back downstairs and started her nightly chores of cleaning the house. Meanwhile, her boyfriend, Pedro Vera, was outside working on a car. Earlier that evening, his cousin Carolyn Correa had stopped by. She was having trouble with her brakes and asked if Pedro would come take a look at her car. Pedro was happy to help, so he let Luzaida know he would be back, and he left with his cousin. After inspecting the car, Pedro told Carolyn that it would take a while to fix the brakes. He told her she could wait inside while he worked. Carolyn went inside and struck up a conversation with Luzaida. They started talking about the new baby. Carolyn told Luzaida that she too was a new mother. They talked for a while until their conversation died down. Luzaida eventually returned to cleaning the house, leaving Carolyn to be entertained by the television in the family room. Not wanting to seem rude, Luzaida would periodically talk to Carolyn between chores so she didn't feel ignored. Around 7 p.m. that night, Luzaida and Carolyn would be startled by a loud explosive noise coming from upstairs. Immediately after hearing the noise, both the women noticed smoke pouring down the stairs. At that moment, it became apparent that a house fire had started upstairs. Luzaida quickly ran upstairs to get her two oldest children out of the house. Carolyn panicked and ran out the house to get Pedro. Luzaida ran up the staircase to get Delimar. When she tried to reach the room Delimar was sleeping in, she was met by a huge fire blazing in the hallway. She felt the intense heat. The fire had grown into an inferno of massive flames and thick black smoke. Luzaida attempted to navigate through the suffocating smoke as her skin was being burned from the intense heat. All she could think about was getting to her helpless 10-day-old baby, lying in a crib behind the massive wall of flames. Panicked, Luzaida started crying as the pain from the heat on her skin grew unbearable. Devastated, Luzaida had no choice but to turn around and exit the house, leaving her baby. Once outside, Luzaida ran into the middle of the street and started screaming for help. One of the neighbor's sons approached Luzaida. She told him that her daughter was still trapped in the house. Without hesitation, he ran into the house to try and save Delimar. He was met with the same intense heat and flames Luzaida encountered earlier. Unfortunately, he was not able to get into Delimar's room, so he exited the house. With a quick response time, firefighters would arrive on the scene. They acted quickly and were able to put the fire out in only 15 minutes. In that short time, the fire had inflicted major damage to the second level of the home. The firemen searched the charred room for any sign of life but only found ashes. They determined that the fire, which was burning at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, had incinerated everything and that it had engulfed the crib. Anything that existed in that front room had been turned to ashes. Luzaida refused to accept that her baby was gone. She told the firefighters that the baby must have been taken before the fire started. Earlier, when Luzaida attempted to get into the baby's room, she noticed that she never once heard the baby crying. She also said that Delimar was not in her crib. She knew that somehow the baby must have been taken. The firefighters, knowing Luzaida was in shock, told her and Pedro in a sympathetic tone that their daughter had met her demise in the fire. Both her and Pedro were completely devastated. After a more thorough inspection, investigators found ash particles that resembled human remains. They would later document that the cause of the fire was from an overheated extension cord attached to a space heater. Over the next few years, Luzaida, still dealing with her loss, never gave up on the idea that her daughter was not in the house at the time of the house fire. Luzaida told everyone that her daughter was still missing and that she had been kidnapped. She told anyone who would listen. Unfortunately, no one believed her, and it eventually caused issues between her and her family, leading to her and Pedro splitting up. In the year 2003, 6 years after the house fire, Luzaida was invited to a children's party thrown by family members. After being at the party for a while, Luzaida noticed a little girl. There was something very peculiar about her. She looked a lot like Luzaida. Luzaida sat and watched the little girl as she played with the other kids. This all seemed surreal. But Luzaida couldn't shake the feeling that this girl might be her lost daughter. She was around the same age as Luzaida's daughter would have been. Factoring in the time she had been missing, Luzaida concluded that this girl was in fact Delimar Vera. Luzaida approached the girl and asked her what her name was. She told Luzaida her name was Alia. Luzaida then asked who her mom was. It was a woman named Carolyn Correa. Once Luzaida found out the name of the girl's mother, Luzaida knew this girl had to be her missing daughter. Luzaida stood there for a moment, deep in thought. She then went over to Alia and told her she had gum in her hair. She removed the gum, but not without pulling extra hairs from Alia's head in the process. She tucked the gum into a napkin and put the napkin into a Ziploc bag and set it inside her purse. Luzaida would leave the party shortly after. A few days later, Luzaida would reach out to Pennsylvania Representative Angel Cruz. This was not for any political reason or social issue plaguing her community. Instead, Luzaida was setting an investigation in motion that would forever change her life. Luzaida explained her 6-year-long anguishing search for her missing daughter and asked him to help aid her. After hearing Luzaida's story and seeing the scars on her skin left from the fire, Angel decided to help her get the answers she had been searching for but had been denied. Angel would put Luzaida in contact with the district attorney. She gave them the Ziploc bag she stored in her purse while at the children's party so the contents could be examined. They opened an investigation into the missing child, and this time Luzaida would finally get the help she had been asking for. Luzaida would spend the next few days anxiously staring at her phone waiting for the phone call. Meanwhile, the police would show up at Carolyn's home, taking the baby to Child Protective Services, where she would remain until the DNA results were in. When she finally received the call, they gave her the answer she was expecting to hear. She was told that the DNA from the hairs in the bag were in fact a match. The girl at the party was none other than missing Delimar Vera. Luzaida started crying tears of joy. After 6 years, she had finally found her daughter. Carolyn was again visited by the police and they arrested her and took her into custody. As it turned out, the night of the fire, Carolyn Correa showed up with the intentions of stealing newborn Delmira. She used her car troubles as a way to gain access to the house. Once inside, she waited for the perfect opportunity. While Luzaida was distracted with work, Carolyn managed to sneak upstairs, take baby Delimar, and set a small fire that would eventually consume all of the second level of Luzaida's home. During the commotion from the smoke and flames, Carolyn managed to escape with the baby, undetected, using the fire to cover up any traces of her crime. Carolyn took baby Delimar back to her home one state over in Willingboro, New Jersey. She told everyone that she gave birth to Delimar inside her house just a few days ago. She renamed Delimar Alia Hernandez and would spend the next 6 years raising Alia as her own. All her neighbors respected Carolyn as a good mother to Alia and her 3 other kids. Or so it seemed. As it turns out, just a year before the fire, Carolyn was working at a medical office. She was eventually terminated for stealing checks from her employer, but not before she set fire to the building to cover up her crimes. She was eventually caught and sentenced to a light 5-year probation. Due to her criminal past, the police were able to make the connection between the arson at the medical office and the fire at Luzaida's house. But one question still plagued the police. How did Carolyn get to the baby without alarming anyone of her scheme? How did she get the baby out of the house without anyone noticing? The police suspected that Carolyn was not acting alone when she stole baby Delimar, but could never prove it. Fortunately, they were still able to connect Carolyn to the missing baby through DNA. In the end, the jury found Carolyn guilty of all charges. After only serving 9 years, Carolyn was released on parole in 2013. To this day, No one knows exactly how Carolyn was able to pull off this crime. Let us know how you think she did it in the comments below. If you liked this story and you haven't already, please hit the like and subscribe buttons for more true crime and mystery stories. Until next time, stay safe. I'm out.